Hey guys, it's Cameron at I Use Properties. I hope everyone's keeping well. With the lockdown and the effects of the lockdown seemingly going to continue for a little while longer, we've had a number of issues rear their heads in the last couple of weeks. And the issue that we're seeing coming up is how, as a landlord, do you get a tenant into your property if no movement can take place currently? And obviously, I think for a lot of landlords, this has put them in a very difficult financial situation because, in effect, nobody's been able to move in or out of a property for the last 4 weeks. And going forward, and obviously with most rentals starting on the 1st of the month, it looks highly likely that the best possible scenario is that for a landlord who had a vacant property before lockdown, these guys are probably looking at having vacant properties for a 2 to 3 month period. And that is an incredibly long time. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic today was from a point of view of, can you afford to be a landlord? So let's think of it this way. Perhaps you're someone, you've met somebody, the two of you have decided to move in together, and you now have a spare apartment. And the thinking is now, well, I'm going to live with my partner, we'll rent out the apartment and we'll make some extra cash that way, which is not a bad idea. The problem is can you afford to be a landlord in that instance? So there are a couple of things that one has to consider before becoming a landlord. And the number one thing is, are you dependent on that income? So for instance, if you're in a situation where that rental income is required or desperately required to cover the bond on the property, that's not a great situation to be in, because tenants potentially are maybe not be in a position to pay you, even though they get vetted and credit checked and all those good things prior to moving in. Obviously, the future, we don't know exactly what's going to take place. So if you're dependent on the tenant paying in order to keep yourself afloat, you've got to weigh that up, because if you are in that situation, maybe you're not really ready to be, a landlord. The next one is, you want to become a landlord, and now the situation is I need, let's say it's 10,000 Rand a month for the rental. The situation is where that property is it in a competitive market? So for instance, if you're the only property in the area that's renting out at 10,000 Rand, then you're probably good to go. But if you have got a property that's in a very competitive market where the average pricing is anywhere between 7,500 and 10,000 Rand, well, then you have a problem, because tenants don't tend to go to the more expensive properties first. They go and have a look at where they perceive to be the best value. And because they're not putting money into the asset, the tendency is for the tenants, as long as it's suiting their basic requirements, they're probably going to go with the cheaper rental first. So that's an issue, because the difference between obviously 7,500 and 10,000 Rand a month is 2.5 grand, which is 25% of the value. The next thing is, and I mean, we often make the suggestion to our landlords, is it's a great idea that once we place a tenant for you, that you get some rental insurance if you are in a situation where that tenant can pay, because the rental insurance can help out. And most rental insurers typically charge anywhere between 5 and 10% of the monthly rental. But there again, if you're working with a 10,000 Rand rental, can you afford to part with the 1,000 Rand a month? So as I go through this list, if your answer is no, and maybe no again, the pros and the cons that you're having to weigh up, potentially now the cons are starting to get a little bit higher. The next one that we get to is, what happens if we're in a terrible situation where the tenant can't pay? Now, one, we all need to understand, tenants or anybody has to have a roof over their heads. And the scenario that we see playing out more often than not is, listen, I'm terribly sorry that I'm doing this to you. It wasn't my intention. I want to move out, but I've got nowhere to go. And I'm really sorry. Now, according to the PI Act, Prevention of Illegal Eviction, you can't just kick somebody out. You have to apply to the courts to have the person evicted. Now, that court process can cost anywhere between 70 and 100,000 Rand. Now, when you tie in that amount of money, and then the unpaid rent, and then the unpaid utilities, you potentially now are looking at a vast sum of money. So again, can you afford to be a landlord? So these are some of the basics that I think someone needs to look at, or you need to look at if you're thinking of getting yourself involved in the property market and you'd like to become a landlord investor. As long as you're answering yes to more of those questions rather than no, then possibly you are in the right space and you can think about becoming a property landlord. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to speaking to everybody soon.